Shabbat Shalom. All of us have moments of leadership. These moments are characterized by the clarity of a goal or a direction that needs to be pursued, the communication of that vision to others, and the ability to offer the necessary support for others to join us. As parents, we exhibit these moments of leadership many times a day. As friends and loved ones, we may offer a vision or direction for another to help them navigate the challenge that they're going through. And then we may stand by their side and encourage them in their bravery and commitment. And we have moments of leadership within organizations where we work with others to envision what is best for the whole, and then help others step forward to fulfill that vision. One of the great mysteries of the Torah is the unfolding narrative of Moses' leadership as it takes place in this week's portion. The people complain to Moses and Aaron that they don't have any water. God tells them to take his staff and speak to the rock, and the water will emerge, just like it did earlier in the book of Exodus. Moses and Aaron gather the people. Moses takes his staff and says, "Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring you water out of this rock?" And then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock with his staff. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. This was the behavior that cost Moses and Aaron the chance of leading the people across the Jordan into the promised land. God says after the incident, "Because you did not have enough faith in me to sanctify me in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I have given them." After serving the Jewish people for over 40 years, leading them out of Egypt, bringing them to Mount Sinai, and now taking them across the wilderness to the promised land, because of one incident, Moses is not allowed to cross into the promised land? The commentators disagree as to which aspect of Moses' behavior was wrong. His anger, his act of striking the rock instead of speaking to it, the implication that it was he and Aaron, not God, who were bringing water forth from the rock. I don't think that we can find a definitive reason for Moses' failing here and whether he deserves the consequences that God gives to him, but we can observe his leadership, specifically the indignant way that he speaks to his people. The book of Numbers details a seemingly endless litany of disheartening and infuriating moments between Moses and Israel. The people grumble constantly and often without any real reason. They complain that the food is boring. They whine that they won't be able to conquer the land. A family of Levites orchestrate a mutiny against Moses and Aaron's leadership. In each of these cases, we encounter a familiar pattern. Illegitimate complaint on the part of the people elicits frustration on the part of Moses and anger and punishment on the part of God. By the time that we arrive at our chapter, we're conditioned to assume that any complaint here by the people are a sign of sinful rebellion. Every time we hear the first hint of whining from the people, we automatically assume that the people's complaint is illegitimate, that the attack on Moses and Aaron is unjustified, and that God's anger and righteous judgment on the people will follow like clockwork. But this time, the situation is different. Our story begins with the narrator, not the people, informing us that when the community arrived at Kadesh, Miriam died there and was buried, and the community was without water. Even though the people expressed their all too familiar wish that they were dead or back in Egypt, the fact remains that for them, they are truly without water. And for Moses, he is truly without his sister. When Moses and Aaron hear the people's complaint, they head to the tent of meeting to await God's response, probably expecting another explosion of God's anger. And yet God doesn't share any irritation. He simply offers instructions for how to provide the people with water. But Moses is angry, even if God is not. Is his anger in this situation just a culmination of frustration upon frustration with a people that aren't able to appreciate him or appreciate God? Has he reached his limit? When patterns of behavior emerge, it's extremely easy to fall into a trap. We assume that what's happening now is just yet another instance of what has already happened countless times before. We too quickly conclude that the people we are dealing with are behaving the way they always do. And as a result, we stop taking them seriously. As parents, how many times have we not been able to hear what our child is really saying because we have already decided that our child always says the same thing? In moments like these, when we become jaded and impatient, we lose our ability or willingness to see the uniqueness of the situation before us. When we assume that everything is familiar, we forfeit the capacity to respond appropriately in a way that God and the moment called for. The accumulated anger and frustration of 40 years bear down on Moses, and he simply cannot see or hear the people anymore. He is so incensed and so emotionally frayed that, as the Torah subtly indicated, he cannot really hear God anymore either. We also cannot ignore that at this moment, he is mourning his sister Miriam. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs suggests that this was the first trial he had to face as leader of the people without the presence of his sister. Let's recall who Miriam was for Moses. She was his eldest sister, his oldest sibling. She had watched over his fate as he floated down the Nile in a pitched basket. She had the presence of mind and the audacity to speak to Pharaoh's daughter and arrange for the child to be nursed by Moses' own mother, Jochebed. Without Miriam, Moses would have grown up not knowing who he was and to which people he belonged. Miriam is a background presence throughout much of the narrative. We see her leading the women in song at the Red Sea, so it is clear that she, like Aaron, had a leadership role. We gain a sense of how much she meant to Moses when she gets a skin disease because of speaking negatively about Moses marrying a Cushite woman. We know that Moses cares deeply for her as he shares one of the shortest and most potent prayers we have, El na rifana la. Please, God, please heal her. Here in our portion, in this narrative, Moses faces a challenge without her for the first time. And for the first time, Moses loses emotional control in the presence of the people. This is one of the effects of bereavement. Some people say that the loss of a sibling is harder to bear than the loss of a parent, depending on the role that a brother or sister plays in one's life. In this case, Miriam was no ordinary sibling. She was a key player in helping Moses awaken to his own Jewish identity and his place in the world, and she was his fellow leader. Rising to moments of leadership can be difficult and lonely. We can suffer deeply from doubt and uncertainty about the best direction to take. Whenever we step forward as a leader in our families, with our peers, our Jewish community, or the larger world, we open ourselves up to criticism, to people who are upset by our choices and positions. We all need what the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, calls a chaver habitachon, a trusted friend, someone in whom you can have absolute trust and share your vulnerability. With Miriam's death, Moses had lost his trusted friend, and it is possible that God knew that without that kind of ally, Moses just would not be able to lead the people into the land in a way that was needed. So as tragic as the situation is, God realizes that God must find someone else, because when all is said and done, you cannot lead a people that you disdain, and you cannot guide a people who you can no longer really see. Moses's key quality of leadership was his empathy, his ability to have compassion for the people and to advocate for them. When each of us, because of stress, because of grief, because of anger, are not able to empathize with the people around us, it's time for us to take a break, to step back, to soothe ourselves with trusted friends, to let our burdens down, and when we're ready, step forward back into leadership again. Shabbat Shalom.